The morning train wheezed into Copper Ridge like an old man climbing stairs. Sheriff Ben Hawkins stood on the platform, watching black smoke curl against the pale sky. His badge caught the early light, but his eyes stayed dark. 3 years of wearing that star had taught him to watch for trouble, and trouble had a way of arriving with strangers. The couple stepped off the train like people running from something they couldn't outrun. The woman clutched a bundle against her chest, and the man kept looking over his shoulder. Their clothes hung loose and dirty. Dust coated their faces like grief. Ben had seen that look before. People who had lost everything and were still losing more. The woman stumbled, and the bundle in her arms made sound. Not the cry of a healthy baby, but something weaker, something fading. Ben's chest tightened. He had learned to hate that sound, the way it reminded him of empty rooms and promises that would never be kept. The man approached him with desperate eyes. "Sheriff, we need help," he said. His voice cracked like dry wood. "We got no money for food. No money for anything. The baby, she's—" He stopped, swallowing hard. The woman pulled back the warm blanket. Inside was a little girl, maybe 6 months old, maybe less. Her skin looked like old paper, and her breathing came in tiny gasps. She was dying. Ben could see it in the way her small chest struggled, in the way her eyes stayed closed even when the light touched her face. "How much?" Ben asked, though he already knew he shouldn't. "What?" the man said. "How much for the baby?" The couple looked at each other. The woman's eyes filled with tears that had no strength left to fall. $1, she whispered. "Just $1, so she don't die with strangers." Ben reached into his pocket. His fingers found the silver dollar he always carried, the one Sarah had given him on their wedding day for luck. He had been carrying it for 7 years, 3 of them after she was gone. It felt warm in his palm, like it remembered her touch. He placed the coin in the man's shaking hand. The woman kissed the baby's forehead and handed her to Ben. The bundle felt lighter than air, like holding a bird with broken wings. The couple walked away without looking back, their shoulders bent under the weight of what they had just done. Ben stood alone on the platform, holding a dying child and wondering what Sarah would think of him now. The baby's face was so thin he could see the blue veins beneath her skin. But something about her made him think of summer mornings and laughter that lived only in memory now. He walked home through streets that knew his sorrow. Every person he passed nodded and looked away. They had watched him bury his wife. They had seen him close the door to the nursery and never open it again. They knew about the crib that still waited in the corner, about the little dresses that still hung in the closet like prayers that had gone unanswered. His house sat at the end of Main Street, white paint peeling like old skin. The front porch creaked under his boots. Inside, the silence felt thick enough to drown in. He had grown used to the quiet, but now it seemed wrong. The baby in his arms deserved better than silence. The nursery door stood closed, just as he had left it 3 years ago. His hand trembled on the brass handle. Sarah had painted this room yellow because she said yellow was the color of hope. Now it just looked like old sunshine, faded and forgotten. The crib stood where they had left it, covered in dust and dreams that would never come true. Ben brushed it clean with gentle hands, the way he might touch Sarah's grave. He laid the baby down on sheets that smelled like lavender in time. She was so still he thought she might already be gone. But then her chest rose, fell, rose again, fighting for each breath like it was all she had left in the world. Ben brought water and tried to get her to drink. Most of it ran down her chin, but some stayed. He found canned milk in the kitchen and mixed it thin, the way he remembered Sarah's sister doing with her own babies back in Kansas. The little girl took a few drops, then a few more. Night fell like a curtain over Copper Ridge. Ben lit the oil lamp and set it on the table beside the crib. The warm light made the yellow walls glow, and for a moment, the room felt alive again. The baby's breathing grew stronger, steadier. Her skin felt less like paper and more like the soft earth after rain. He dozed in the chair beside her, his chin on his chest, dreaming of Sarah. In his dream, she was hanging little dresses in the closet and humming a song he couldn't quite remember. When he woke, the lamp was burning low and the baby was stirring. Her eyes opened for the first time since he had brought her home. They were blue, the color of deep water. She looked at him without fear, as if she had been waiting her whole short life to see his face. Then her tiny mouth moved, forming sounds that weren't quite words but weren't just noise either. "Sarah," she whispered. Ben's blood turned to ice water. He leaned closer, certain he had heard wrong. The baby's lips moved again, and the same sound came out, soft as prayer. "Sarah." The lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the yellow walls. Ben stared at the child's face in the shifting light, and his heart stopped beating for one long, impossible moment. She looked exactly like Sarah. The same small nose, the same curve of the lips, the same way her eyebrows drew together when she was thinking. It was like looking at his wife as a baby, like time had folded back on itself and brought her home to him in the most impossible way. But Sarah was buried in the cemetery behind the church. He had put her there himself, had thrown dirt on the coffin that held the only woman he would ever love. This baby was a stranger, bought for $1 from people running from their own sorrow. Yet when she whispered his dead wife's name again, Ben knew that nothing in his life would ever be the same. Some mysteries were too deep for understanding, too strange for anything but faith. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like fingers trying to get in. The baby reached up with one tiny hand, and Ben let her wrap her fingers around his thumb. Her grip was stronger now, full of the fierce will to live that he had forgotten he possessed. As dawn crept through the curtains, painting the nursery walls with new light, Ben realized he was no longer alone in his grief. But the questions that had awakened with the baby would not let him rest, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he could almost hear Sarah's voice telling him that some stories were just beginning. 3 days passed like slow water. The baby grew stronger with each sunrise, her skin losing that paper-thin look that had made Ben fear she would slip away in the night. She took milk from a bottle now, her tiny hands trying to hold it herself. When she looked at him with those blue eyes, Ben felt something crack open in his chest that had been locked tight for 3 years. He named her Hope, though he didn't tell anyone why. It seemed like the kind of name Sarah would have chosen, simple and honest, like morning light on clean sheets. The town noticed. Towns always noticed when something changed, especially something as strange as Sheriff Ben Hawkins carrying a baby girl down Main Street. The women whispered behind their hands when he bought milk and cloth diapers at Murphy's General Store. The men nodded and looked away, the way they always did when they didn't know what to say. "That baby," Mrs. Patterson said to her neighbor loud enough for Ben to hear. "She looks just like poor Sarah did when she was small. I remember the pictures her mother showed me once." Ben's step faltered. He had never seen pictures of Sarah as a baby. They had been lost in the fire that took her parents' house when she was 16. But Mrs. Patterson had known Sarah's family longer than anyone in Copper Ridge. If she saw the resemblance too, then Ben wasn't losing his mind. He spent his mornings walking the streets with hope bundled against his chest, asking questions that led nowhere. The couple who had sold her to him, where had they come from? Nobody at the train station remembered seeing them before that morning. The ticket master said they had bought passage to Denver with $1 Ben had given them, but the Denver train had been delayed. They could be anywhere now, carrying their grief down dusty roads toward tomorrow. Hope slept in Sarah's old crib, surrounded by the yellow walls that had once held so much promise. At night, Ben would sit beside her and read aloud from the newspaper, his voice low and steady. She seemed to like the sound of words, even if she couldn't understand them yet. Sometimes she would reach up and touch his face with her small fingers, and Ben would remember what it felt like to be needed. On the 4th day, a traveling preacher rode into town. He was a thin man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. His horse looked tired, and his black coat was faded to the color of old ashes. He carried a worn leather Bible in his saddlebags and a wooden cross that hung from his neck on a piece of braided rope. Ben found him watering his horse at the trough behind the church. The man looked up when Ben approached, and something passed between them, the kind of recognition that happens between people who have both lost something precious. "Sheriff," the preacher said, tipping his hat. His voice carried the weight of long roads and longer prayers. "I'm Pastor Samuel Wright." I was hoping to hold services here on Sunday, if that's all right with you and the good people of Copper Ridge. That would be welcome, Ben said. We haven't had a preacher through here in months. He paused, studying the man's face. You look like you've traveled far. Pastor Wright nodded. From Wyoming, most recently. Before that, Kansas. Before that. He shrugged. God calls us where he will. Ben shifted hope in his arms. She had been fussing all morning, as if she could sense something in the air. Now she grew quiet, her blue eyes fixed on the preacher's face. Beautiful child, Pastor Wright said softly. She has the look of someone I knew once. His eyes grew distant. A woman I buried not 3 months ago, up near Cheyenne, died bringing her baby into the world. Poor soul. Ben's heart began to beat faster. What was her name? Rose, the preacher said. Rose Harper, though that might not have been her real name. She was traveling with a wagon train, trying to get to California. But the baby came early, and there were complications. He touched the cross at his throat. She called out for someone named Sarah with her last breath. Over and over, like it was the most important thing in the world. The world tilted around Ben like a house in an earthquake. He gripped Hope tighter, feeling her solid warmth against his chest. What happened to the baby? Pastor Wright's face grew even sadder. A couple in a wagon train took her. Good people, but poor as dirt. They were heading this way, looking for work. But children need more than good intentions to survive. He looked at Hope again, and his eyes widened. My lord, that's her, isn't it? That's Rose's baby. Ben nodded, not trusting his voice to work. How did you come by her? Ben told him about the morning train, the desperate couple, the silver dollar that had bought a life. Pastor Wright listened without interrupting, his weathered hands folded over his Bible. Rose never spoke of family, the preacher said when Ben finished. But she had the look of someone carrying secrets. And when she said that name, Sarah, it was like she was trying to send a message across the great divide. He studied Hope's face with wonder. This child is blessed, Sheriff. To find her way to you, to survive when everything was against her, that's the hand of Providence. Ben wanted to ask more questions, but Hope began to cry. Not the weak mewling of her first days, but the strong, demanding cry of a healthy baby. He rocked her gently, and she quieted, her small fist curling around his finger. Pastor, Ben said carefully, did Rose ever mention anyone else? A sister, maybe? Someone she had left behind. The older man's eyes grew thoughtful. She spoke of regrets, he said slowly, of someone she had hurt by leaving. Said she was too ashamed to go home, too proud to ask for forgiveness. He paused. Why do you ask? Ben looked down at Hope's face, seeing Sarah in every line and curve. My wife's name was Sarah. And this baby, she looks exactly like my wife did. Pastor Wright was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his Bible and turned the pages with gentle hands. I keep records, he said. Names, dates, final words. It helps me remember the souls I've sent on to glory. He found what he was looking for and read silently, his lips moving. Rose called out 2 names before she died. He said finally. Sarah was one. The other was Benjamin. The world stopped turning. Ben felt the blood drain from his face as the truth hit him like a physical blow. Hope made a soft sound and reached up to touch his cheek, as if she could feel his shock. She knew my name, Ben whispered. Pastor Wright closed the Bible and looked at him with eyes full of compassion. I believe, Sheriff, that this child was meant to find you. That her mother, Rose, was trying to bring her home to the only family she had left. He paused. The question now is what God wants you to do with this gift. Ben stood in the dusty churchyard, holding the baby who had changed everything, and wondered if the dead could still keep promises. Pastor Wright sat across from Ben in the small parlor, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had grown cold while they talked. Hope slept in Ben's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with the trust that only babies possessed. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and memory. I need to tell you something that might break your heart all over again, the preacher said quietly. But I believe you have a right to know. Ben nodded, though part of him wanted to stop the conversation right there. Some truths were harder to bear than lies, and he had learned to be afraid of hope. It had a way of cutting deeper than despair when it was taken away. Pastor Wright opened his Bible to a page near the back, where he had written notes in careful script. Rose told me her story the night before she died. She was in terrible pain, and I think she knew she wouldn't see the morning. Sometimes, when death is close, people need to unburden their souls. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows like fingers trying to get in. Hope stirred in Ben's arms but didn't wake. Her face in sleep looked so much like Sarah that it made his chest ache. She said she had a twin sister, Pastor Wright continued, identical in every way, except for their hearts. Rose was wild, rebellious, always running toward trouble. Her sister was gentle, steady, the kind of woman who would wait for the right man and build a life worth living. Ben's throat tightened. Sarah had mentioned a sister once, early in their marriage. But when he had asked about her family, Sarah's eyes had filled with tears, and she had asked him never to bring up again. He had respected her silence, the way you respect a wound that hasn't healed. The sisters fought, Pastor Wright said. Rose had gotten herself in trouble with a man who wouldn't marry her. She was barely 18, scared and ashamed. Her sister tried to help, tried to convince her to stay and face it together. But Rose wouldn't listen. She ran away in the middle of the night, stealing money from their parents' jar and leaving nothing but a note that said she was dead to them. The old preacher paused, looking at Hope with sad eyes. Rose never saw her family again, but she carried the guilt of it like a stone in her chest. She named this baby Hope because she said it was the only good thing she had ever done. Ben felt something cold settle in his stomach. What was her sister's name? Sarah, Pastor Wright said softly. Sarah Rose Harper. They shared the middle name, the way twins sometimes do. The world tilted again, but this time Ben was ready for it. He looked down at Hope, seeing not just Sarah's face, but Rose's too. The sister Sarah had mourned in silence, the twin who had torn her heart in half by leaving. Rose knew about you, Pastor Wright continued. She had heard somehow that her sister had married a sheriff named Benjamin in a town called Copper Ridge. She was trying to get to California, she said, but part of her wanted to come here, to see if Sarah could ever forgive her. Ben's voice came out rough as sandpaper. Sarah died 3 years ago, in childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. Pastor Wright closed his eyes for a moment. Rose never knew. She died calling out for her sister, trying to send her baby home to the only family she had left. He opened his eyes and looked at Ben with something that might have been wonder. This child is your niece, Sheriff. She's Sarah's blood, her sister's daughter. She belongs with you. Ben stood up slowly, still holding Hope, and walked to the window. Outside, Copper Ridge looked the same as it always had, dusty streets, weathered buildings, people going about their daily business. But everything had changed. The baby in his arms wasn't just a stranger he had saved. She was family. She was the piece of Sarah that had been lost and found again. Sarah talked about her sister sometimes when she was sleeping, Ben said quietly. She would cry and say she was sorry, over and over. I never understood what she meant. Twins have a connection, Pastor Wright said. Even when they're apart, even when they're angry, they feel each other's pain. Sarah probably knew, somehow, that Rose was in trouble, that she needed help. Ben turned back to face the preacher. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just a story? Pastor Wright reached into his coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a locket made of tarnished silver. Rose asked me to keep this safe for her daughter. She said it belonged to her sister. Ben's hands shook as he took the locket. He had seen it before, around Sarah's neck on their wedding day. She had said it was all she had left of her family. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Sarah, young and smiling, and one of another girl who looked exactly like her. Rose. The locket felt warm in his palm, like it remembered Sarah's skin. Hope woke up and looked at it with curious eyes, her small hand reaching out to touch the silver surface. She knew, Ben whispered. Somehow, Rose knew this would find its way back to Sarah's family. Pastor Wright nodded. Love has a way of crossing impossible distances. Even death can't stop it sometimes. Ben sat back down, cradling Hope and the locket both. The baby made soft sounds, not quite words, but close to them, as if she was trying to tell him something important. When she looked at him, Ben saw Sarah's eyes, but also something else, a wildness that must have come from Rose, a strength that had carried her through impossible hardships. "What am I supposed to do now?" Ben asked. "I never planned on being a father. I buried that dream with Sarah. Dreams have a way of finding us in new forms," Pastor Wright said. "This child needs you. She's been through hell and back, and she's still fighting. That's Rose's spirit in her. But she needs Sarah's gentleness too, Sarah's steady love. You're the only one who can give her both." Ben looked around the parlor, at Sarah's chair by the fireplace, at the photographs on the mantel, at the life they had built together that had ended too soon. For 3 years, he had been living in a museum of memory, afraid to change anything, afraid to let go. Now Hope reached up and touched his face with her tiny fingers, and Ben felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of it, like the first green shoots that push through the ground after a long winter. "She's so small," he said. "Children are tougher than they look," Pastor Wright replied, "especially ones who have survived what this little one has. She chose you, Sheriff. Out of all the people in the world, she found her way to you." Outside, the wind carried dust and the promise of change. Ben held his wife's sister's daughter and felt the weight of a future he had never imagined. The past wasn't gone. It lived on in Hope's eyes, in the locket's warm silver, in the love that had traveled across impossible distances to bring them together. But the future was calling too, soft as a baby's breath, strong as the wind that never stopped blowing across the empty spaces of the heart. Spring came to Copper Ridge the way it always did, slowly, like an old friend who had been away too long. Ben stood in the backyard behind his house, holding Hope's small hand as she took careful steps through the grass. She was 2 years old now, steady on her feet, but still reaching for his fingers when the world seemed too big. The white headstone stood where it always had, simple and clean under the apple tree. Sarah Elizabeth Hawkins, beloved wife, carved in letters that time had not yet worn away. But something had changed around it. Where once there had been only grief and empty ground, now there were flowers. Ben had planted them the summer after Hope arrived. Roses for the sister Sarah had lost, daisies for the innocents that had been found again, and sunflowers because Hope laughed when she saw how tall they grew. The garden had become a place of memory and life both, where the past and present could exist together without pain. "Mama Sarah," Hope said, pointing at the headstone with her chubby finger. She couldn't say the words clearly yet, but Ben understood. He had been telling her stories about her aunt since she was old enough to listen. Stories of a gentle woman who had loved roses and yellow paint and the sound of rain on the roof. "That's right, little one," Ben said, lifting her up so she could touch the smooth stone. "That's your Mama Sarah. She's been waiting to meet you for a long time." Hope pressed her palm against the carved letters, serious in the way that small children could be. The wind rustled through the apple tree, and for a moment, Ben could almost feel Sarah there with them, watching her sister's daughter grow up in the garden she had always dreamed of having. The years had been kind to them both. Hope grew from a fragile baby into a sturdy little girl with Sarah's gentle eyes and Rose's stubborn spirit. She walked early, talked early, and had a way of looking at the world that reminded Ben of sunrise. Everything new and full of possibility. The town had accepted them as family. Mrs. Patterson brought soup when Hope was teething. Doc Miller checked on her every few months, marveling at how healthy she had become. The children at church played with her on Sundays, and their mothers spoke of Ben with the kind of respect reserved for men who had chosen love over loneliness. Pastor Wright had stayed in Copper Ridge longer than he had planned, drawn by the need to watch over the miracle he had helped create. He baptized Hope in the creek behind the church on a warm Sunday in May, holding her gently as the water washed over her dark hair. She didn't cry, just looked up at the sky with wonder, as if she could see something the rest of them couldn't. "She has old eyes," the pastor had said afterward, "like she's been here before and remembers more than she should." Ben knew what he meant. Sometimes, when Hope was playing quietly with her wooden blocks, she would look up and smile at empty air as if someone was there talking to her. Ben liked to think it was Sarah, sharing secrets that only aunts and nieces understood. The hardest moments came at night, when Hope would wake up crying from dreams she couldn't explain. Ben would hold her in the rocking chair by the window, humming songs Sarah used to sing, until the fear passed and she slept again. Those were the times when he wondered if he was enough, if a broken-hearted sheriff could really raise a little girl who deserved the whole world. But then morning would come, and Hope would wake up laughing, reaching for him with complete trust, and Ben would remember that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up day after day and choosing to care more about someone else's happiness than your own fear. On Hope's third birthday, Ben gave her Sarah's locket. She was old enough now to wear it without losing it, old enough to understand that it was special. Inside, the photographs of Sarah and Rose had faded, but their faces were still clear, two sisters who had loved each other even when they couldn't be together. "Tell me about Mama Rose," Hope said that night as Ben tucked her into bed. It had become their ritual, the bedtime story that never got old. "Mama Rose was brave," Ben said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "She made mistakes like all of us do. But in the end, she did the most important thing a mother can do. She made sure you were safe. And Mama Sarah? Mama Sarah was kind. She would have loved you so much, Hope. She would have sung to you and taught you to bake cookies and braided your hair every morning." Ben smoothed the covers around her small form. "She's the reason you have yellow walls and a garden full of flowers. She's the reason I knew how to love you from the very first day." Hope touched the locket at her throat. "Do they watch me?" "Every day," Ben said. "They're proud of what a good girl you've become." As Hope drifted off to sleep, Ben stood at her window, looking out at the garden. The roses were blooming again, red and white and pink in the moonlight. The apple tree Sarah had planted as a newlywed spread its branches over her grave like a blessing. 5 years had passed since the morning train had brought strangers and a dying baby to Copper Ridge. 5 years since Ben had paid a silver dollar for a life that had changed everything. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it had learned to make room for other things. Joy, laughter, the sound of small feet running through the house at dawn. Hope talked in her sleep sometimes, little whispers in a language Ben couldn't understand. But tonight she was quiet, her breathing steady and peaceful. The locket rose and fell with each breath, catching the light from the hallway. Ben had thought his story was over when Sarah died. Had believed that love was something that came once in a lifetime, if you were lucky, and then left you with nothing but memories and regret. But Hope had taught him that love was bigger than that, wider than loss, stronger than the wind that tried to scatter everything you held dear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hope would grow older, ask harder questions, need more than he knew how to give. But tonight, in a yellow nursery that had waited so long for laughter, Ben felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The wind stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of roses and the promise of rain. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, carrying other strangers toward other destinies. But Ben's journey had led him here, to this moment, to this child who was both ending and beginning, loss and discovery, the answer to prayers he had been afraid to pray. Love, he had learned, always found a way home.